Today on UpFront, my extended interview with Governor Walker. Next, the governor on fixing our roads. How does he think the transportation funding debate will end? Fears of a trade war with Canada. Is Donald Trump's tough talk helping or hurting? And the governor's plans for 2018. Is he the favorite if he runs for a third term?
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is UpFront with Mike Gousha.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to UpFront. The legislature's budget writing committee really gets down to business this week and will begin voting on the state's next two-year spending plan. So what's likely to be in and out of the new budget? How will taxpayer dollars be spent? Republican Governor Scott Walker is our guest for the entire program today. Governor, good to have you back on UpFront.
Good to be with you, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about the budget and first of all, transportation, since there's been a lot of back and forth on that. Give me your sense of where this is all going to end. What's this look like at the end of the day?
Well, when we started the budget process all the way through, consistently I've said it's a priority. In fact, the budget we proposed would put, cumulatively would have put $24 billion in over the 8 years that I've served by the time this budget is done. That's about $3 billion more than Jim Doyle did. So we put more into transportation for local road aids to fix roads and bridges, more to fix our state highways than ever before. There are some in the legislature who'd like to spend a little bit more. I'm willing to work with them on that. I've said repeatedly, we've already 2 weeks ago identified about $100 million more that can go in. I just want to add a gas tax or a vehicle registration fee, and I think we can get there.
And so how do you get there if you don't add a gas tax or a vehicle registration fee?
Well, 2 weeks ago, Dave Ross, our new Secretary of Transportation, did a good job. About a third of that was from higher than expected revenues. We hope that will continue to grow.
You'll know more in May on,
yeah, absolutely. And about two-thirds of that are dollars that we saved from lead. So historically, those dollars kind of just disappeared out there in the past, regardless of administration. We've actively said, no, we need to take those savings, apply those to doing new projects in the future. And we think we can find $200 to $300 million that we can essentially hand to the legislature and say, if you want to add more projects, you want to accelerate some things, we're willing to work with you on that.
Is this a short-term fix? That's what critics will say. A short-term fix. Why don't we do what Iowa did or what Indiana did or what Michigan did? And they bit the bullet and said, we're going to have to raise the gas tax a little bit in most of those cases, or quite a bit, as they did in Iowa, 10 cents a gallon. But said, we've got to do it to do long-term planning, long-term repairs.
But the difference is other states, Iowa, for which I love the folks in Iowa, but they don't yet have the reform dividend we've had here. It's why we're able to put, for example, historic amounts in K-12 education as well. We're able to continue to provide property and income tax relief. In fact, eliminated a whole state tax in the state budget as well, and still put more into transportation. The difference is, with that reform dividend, we're able to continue to grow. And there are two key things that we include in this budget that haven't got a lot of attention. One is prevailing wage. Now, they may take that out and vote on that separately, but either way, that lowers the cost of providing that transportation infrastructure work. And secondly, one of the things that really hasn't got coverage, and that is what's called the PECVA fund. That's the dollars that for the last couple of decades have been used to clean up abandoned or old gas station sites. That'll be paid off. All the bonding on that will be paid off, and the 2 cents per gallon that currently is already collected, gas tax money that's already collected, will permanently go into the transportation fund. So it'll be like a 2 cent a gallon increase, a 2 cent a gallon increase.
So I hear you saying, other than that, you would veto anything that contains gas tax increase, vehicle registration fee increase, any of that is going to be vetoed.
I've said that from day one, from the time I introduced the budget, consistently all the way through. People keep asking about variations. I think there are ways we can put more dollars in to pay for things like transit out of the general fund and take it off the transportation fund. There are other ways we can do that, but now's not the time to raise gas taxes.
Final question on this. One of the arguments seems to be is what condition the state's roads are in. You see some of these reports, you hear Speaker Voss, Chairman Nygren talk about the poor condition of the state roads. I've had Dewey Strobel, the senator from Ozaukee County, on this program. He says that's overstated. They're not as bad as people say. How would you describe the condition of the state roads right now?
Well, I think if you look at the ratings that we've consistently used in the past, not just of late in this debate, you look at the main core, the backbone of the state system, and over 90% are ranked fair or better. Now, there are some that need improvements, and that's why we put record amounts. We've never invested more than we're proposing this budget for local roads, for county trunk roads, for state highway rehab. all the things at the local level that for years we've heard local officials say we need more help, and we listened. We held listening sessions in every one of our 72 states. That was one of the clearest things we heard back from, and that's what we're doing.
I do want to ask about that number, though, because I've seen studies by the American Society of Civil Engineers say 71% are in mediocre or poor condition. So there are other numbers out there.
There are. There's a whole spectrum out there. The bottom line is many of those statistics, even in those other rankings, different than what we've had consistently used in the Department of Transportation in the past. They tie in very much to local roads, to the county trunk roads, the town roads in many of our rural areas. That's why in this budget we provide more assistance, particularly for town roads, than we've ever had before. And so they're going to be the ones getting the biggest benefit out of our proposal.
If you move some money from general revenue, tax revenue, over to pay for transportation, what happens to, for example, the increase you propose for K through 12 spending or the UW system? What happens?
Well, we don't take that in the things we've looked at. We found it through additional savings that we found through waste, fraud, and abuse, through readjusting some other priorities. But we are fully committed. You remember a month or so ago, there was a fair amount of concern. In fact, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards put out an alert. I joined with them. They were concerned that the legislature might go down to zero. Our budget, the budget I proposed to them, put the most amount ever, the highest amount in K through 12 spending than ever before. The good news is, through a lot of attention drawn to this issue, they've now committed to keep that as the base. And in fact, about a week ago, the leaders of the Joint Finance Committee said it's very likely they're just going to keep intact what we've done. So K through 12 education increases continue. The new money we put in the UW system, I think, is going to be sound. The new money we're putting in the technical colleges, I think, is sound. The big thing I want to make sure on top of all this is we've had revenue growth even while tax rates have gone down. We've cut taxes consistently since I've been governor on property and income taxes. If we want, and yet revenues have gone up. If we want to continue to be able to do that, we've got to continue to provide that tax relief. And one of the things I worry about is that there might be some out there who say, well, we can ease off a little bit on property tax relief. Or one of the things we've heard in the Capitol of late is people say, well, maybe we don't need to eliminate the state tax that I proposed on the property tax bill. I say absolutely not. That is permanent tax relief that people can take to the bank. We need to eliminate the state tax and property tax.
Back to K through 12 education spending, $649 million. Here's the question you hear about that. A couple of years ago, very flat budget for K through 12. This is a very substantial increase. Superintendent Evers, among others, likes that. But the question is, is the state's fiscal situation so different today than it was then? Or is this, as your critics say, simply an election year budget? It looks good, it feels good to the public out there.
Well, it's a number of things. It's responding to the listening sessions that we had across the state, and not only to teachers we invited, students we invited, superintendents, school board members, but on top of that, what I heard repeatedly all across the state, as I still do, even this past week, are people, employers telling me we have jobs. We just don't have enough people with the education and the skills to fit that. So workforce, to me, is the #1 priority in this budget. We now have more people employed in the state than we've ever had before. And unemployment rate's down to 3.4%. That's the lowest it's been since April of the year 2000. We're one of the top 10 states in terms of people in the workforce that are actively working in this state. And so my ongoing concern is, where do I find enough people to fill those positions? And it's why it's a whole spectrum, from worker training, technical colleges, youth apprenticeships, but K through 12 is a fundamental part of that. And with a reform dividend that is so sizable, we're able to do that, still cut taxes, still invest in transportation, fit the priorities. And for years, people told me, you got to do these tough reforms, but ultimately the voters want something to pay off for that, and this is the payoff. Education, transportation, tax relief continues.
So the election year has nothing to do with the increase?
Well, it all fits together. I mean, this is, we laid out a plan. That's why I call it a reform dividend. This is not a bonus. This is not unexpected. We laid out over time a series of reforms that we said were tough but necessary, but would lead to prosperity, would lead to better times. These are the better times. And if next year people look at that and say, yeah, that's good stuff, I want more of that, that would be a pretty good campaign slogan. We're going
to take a break now. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Governor Walker. We'll be talking a little bit about the latest on that trade dispute with Canada. That and much more when we come back. Welcome back to UpFront and our extended interview with Governor Walker today. Governor, let's talk a little bit about the University of Wisconsin system. It sounds like your plan for a tuition cut is not going to survive. Are you disappointed by that?
Well, good negotiations. At a minimum, I'd like to make sure we maintain a freeze. In these listening sessions I alluded to, and in other places, I hear not only from college students, I hear from their families, and I hear from a lot of high school students. In fact, just the other day, I was at a high school where I talked about this very subject, and I said, I hear from high school students all the time about their worries about the high cost of higher education. Every one of the seniors' heads, and a few juniors too, were nodding out there, because not just here in Wisconsin, but across the nation. I mean, since 1978, tuition's gone up 4 times the rate of inflation, and I think that's a real concern for working families all across the state. So we froze tuition 4 years in a row. I propose freezing it the first year of the budget, cutting it the second year. I'd love to still have the cut, because I think that would help a lot more families have access. But if nothing else, they at least have to maintain that freeze.
I think you said a couple of moments ago you expect that most of your increase for the UW system will survive intact, about $100 million increase
Yeah, $100
total.
million just in total, beyond the $35 million we set aside just for the reduction in tuition. And I think there's a strong sense, again, that it's not just about saying we're spending more in the UW, but it ties into this workforce issue. It's why we put in performance measures that we work with the University of Wisconsin Regents on to say, I not only want more people enrolled, more specifically, I want more graduates. I'd like to have more graduates in high demand. I'd like to have them graduate in a reasonable amount of time, and I'd like to have them graduate and get jobs here in the state of Wisconsin.
The UW system president, Ray Cross, said it's the best budget that he has seen in a while. And yet there are people, and you hear from them, who say what happened a couple of years ago, the deep cuts to UW, did long-term damage to the institution's reputation, its ability to attract grant money, its ability to attract and retain top-notch faculty. Do you think there was any damage from the budget?
Actually, the data shows just the opposite, that we moved up yet again. The University of Wisconsin, our flagship in Madison, moved up on the rankings of the best institutions of higher education, according to U.S. News and World Report, moved up again. A number of other campuses in the UW system got called out for good marks on those rankings as well. And so people forget that the state funding is only a fraction of all the money, from tuition to grants to assistance to donations, all sorts of things. It is a combination of things here, but in this case, it's not just the new funding, it's targeted in key areas that will help broaden the spectrum, and it's helping out in areas, even for non-traditional learners, to help broaden the workforce.
So late last week, a couple of lawmakers introduced legislation that is very similar to what you wanted to put in the budget regarding the UW and what's called campus free speech. So that was taken out because it was considered a non-fiscal item, but it's coming back to life now. And essentially, and I want to make sure I get this right, the lawmakers' bill would require the University of Wisconsin systems to discipline students, possibly suspend or expel them, who disrupt speeches on campus. It would also say that the university has to maintain a position of neutrality on controversial public policy issues. I would imagine you're pleased with this. Why is this needed? And are you concerned that in any way free speech rights of people who may not agree with speakers who are on campus are infringed?
Well, the problem is right now you have just the opposite. You have, particularly amongst a lot of liberal groups and organizations, you have the opinion that their point of view, which they say to be open-minded about, they're really not open-minded, that they only want to hear from people who agree from them. To me, a university should be precisely the spot where you have an open and free dialogue about all different positions. And people can certainly, whether it's against me or somebody else, say, I disagree. But disagreeing or even protesting is one thing. If you come into an auditorium where they're having a discussion or a conversation on this and you want to hold signs up, you want to protest that, you want to have a rally out in front, perfectly fine. But the minute that you shut down a speaker, no matter whether they're liberal, conservative, or somewhere in between, I just think that's wrong. To me, a university, anywhere, free speech should be upheld. But at a minimum, at a university, should be precisely the spot where we say people have a right to be heard. And if someone has a contrary viewpoint, set up a similar symposium or hold a protest outside. But disrupting, shutting down, as we've seen not only here in Wisconsin but elsewhere across the country, shutting down the ability for someone to actually be heard is not free speech.
As policy, how important is this to you and to members of the legislature?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's not just on the principle, which in of itself is strong, but I think in the larger context, again, if we're going to be providing taxpayers' money, if the hardworking taxpayers of the state are going to be supporting our institutions of higher education, I think there's an expectation that all voices can be heard and that there's an amount of respect. To me, my free speech rights don't transcend your right to be heard, and I think that's the problem we've had. And we see it, again, this is not unique to Wisconsin. We see it around the country, in some cases around the world, that some people think that only certain voices should be heard. I think we need to stand up and advocate for all voices being heard.
I'm going to take another break. We will get to the Canada trade dispute in a moment. We'll also talk about 2018. Back with Governor Walker in just a moment. We're back one final time today with Governor Walker. Some developments in this, I guess you can call it a trade dispute with Canada. They've changed some of their pricing policies in terms of dairy products that typically go from Wisconsin to Canada. You had dozens of farmers in the state who were wondering if they were going to be able to keep their farms because they didn't have a place to sell their product. Sounds like there's a short-term solution. You've got people stepping up here in the state of Wisconsin to help these farmers, but that's short-term. What does a long-term solution look like?
Well, and first I want to say thanks, because whether it's Mullins, who was one of the biggest, but plenty of others out there who stepped up, and a whole group that got together this last month, Ben Brantz, our Secretary of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, really being at the forefront of physically going through with our farm center and trying to connect people to possibilities, opening up loan guarantees, all sorts of other things out there. But long term, there's got to be a change in policy. I advocated for this almost a year ago with then President Obama's administration, with his trade representative, with the Ag Secretary. Obviously, we've done the same with the president, the current president, and thank God. I appreciate President Trump stepping up and being, I think, much more aggressive than just about anybody thought he would be.
Was
here.
he too aggressive?
No, I think it's great. I mean, long term, I want good trade relations with Canada. Canada is our #1 trading partner, both export and import. I want that all throughout North America, but I believe dairy farmers here, just like timber producers here in Wisconsin, are the best in the world. We can compete with anybody out there, but we need a level playing field. And so when they were artificially lowering the price structure to give an unfair advantage to dairy farmers in Canada, that put our dairy farmers at a disadvantage. That's got to change long term, and I think it will.
So the prospect of, I don't want to say trade war, but I guess that is something that could be on the table. But that has to make you nervous, doesn't it? We've got so many people in this state who ship products to Canada. They're our largest importer.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I've been there myself before. I'll be there again next year on a trade mission, just like I go to Mexico and other places around the world. But I firmly believe that we've got Canada's attention with this. I believe that they're not going to permanently keep the tariff on timber, but I do believe it's gotten Canada's attention. They're now sending in some of their top cabinet members from Prime Minister Trudeau's administration to meet directly with us. We hadn't had that in the past. We'd only really dealt with the Consul General's office, and so they clearly have President Trump's comments have clearly put this on a priority for Canada, and we think that's good, and we think we can work this out. We want to work this out. We want good trade.
So let's spend the final couple minutes on 2018. Everybody assumes you're going to be a candidate. You are going to be a candidate, are you not, for re-election?
Well, as I've said, I'll make an announcement official after the budget's done. But when I get asked this, when people say you're going to run, I said, well, with more people employed than ever before, why wouldn't I run? With Wisconsin in the top 10 states of people in the workforce, with Wisconsin in the top 10 states for ACT scores, with Wisconsin in the top 10 states for high school graduation rates and for healthcare systems and for people with access to healthcare, you go down the list with all these great things happening. And let me tell you, Mike, I've never been more positive during all my years as governor about the future of the state than I am right now. And so, to me, it's very appealing to say, yeah, I'd like to keep this state on the right track. I'd like to keep us in the right direction. I'd like to do even more to improve the quality of life for every citizen in every part of the state of Wisconsin. I think there's more we can do.
So would you be the prohibitive favorite if indeed you run? And I mean, well, based on what you just said about what you feel you've accomplished?
Well, and elections, Tommy Thompson, my good friend, always told me elections are about the future, not just about the past. So it's not just running on a strong record, for which I think it is. When I was on this show, beginning of 2010, the unemployment rate peaked out at 9.2%. It's now down to 3.4%. When I look at all these good things happening, yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason why you have a large number of candidates the last few weeks who said they're not going to run. But the flip side of that is you've got the former president, the former attorney general, and a group out there raising $500 million, $500 million to go after me and 12 other governors this next fall. So I can't take anything for granted. I assume that we're going to have a well-funded opponent if we get in the race. And as it always is here in Wisconsin, it's going to be tough. But I'm excited about the possibility.
Governor Walker, good to have you back on the program.